That's right. And at this point, remember that the UN Security Council is also holding an emergency meet, seeing what's playing out right now between Ukraine and Russia. The Russian representative there has, in fact, defended President Putin's call. He said the special operation has been declared to protect the people of Ukraine who've been suffering for years. We aim to de-genocide Ukraine. And the decision has been made in line with Article 51 of the UN Charter. So, Geeta, while there's been a lot of talk about, how this is in violation of international guidelines, of international principles, Russia is maintaining that at this point they're doing what needs to be done to protect the people of Ukraine.
Let's give a context to what is really happening over here. Donetsk and Luhansk are regions that Russia has always influenced. And every time Ukraine or a particular Ukrainian administration that is pro-West thinks of joining the European Union or, for that matter, NATO, there's trouble that we see in this region, which is pro-Russia, because then these are the very same people who then question the administration in Kyiv. And now, because of the kind of the situation that is on the ground, and Donetsk and Luhansk haven't been declared independent states and republics by Russia, they had already broken away long ago, is the reason why Russia is using this as context to say that if at all tensions increase between the two sides, and the fact that Russia has declared them independent states, Ukraine is going to act against these regions, these territories, and if that happens, Russia will have to defend and fight for the safety and security of the people of Donetsk and Luhansk. Many of them of Russian origin, many of them even hold Russian passports. So that's the context, Akshita. It is the premise was built by the Russian president in order to ensure and in order to justify action in this entire region, in this very region. And that's what the Russian envoy to the United Nations said, even at the United Nations Security Council. What they are saying is, because this is the language that is primarily used in the United Nations about human rights, lives, cost to human lives, and which is what he emphasized. He said that these are people who are being attacked from the Ukrainian side. Ukraine is trying to defend its territory, but they are saying that because Russia has declared them republics, the Ukrainian action against Donetsk and Luhansk is something that worries Russia, and so Russia is going to go ahead and defend the rights of the people.
Okay, Geeta, I'm just going to come back to you. Gaurav Sawant is joining us live from Donbass, and I'm going to hand it across to Shivarur for that. Two reporters who've covered conflict in great detail. So Shiv, Gaurav with us there.
Gaurav continues to be with us, and like I said, the only Indian journalist with the only Indian channel reporting from Donbass. You can hear explosions around Gaurav. There's shelling that's taking place in the distance. Gaurav is in the Donbass region, which is in eastern Ukraine, which is a breakaway rebel region of Ukraine that is the targeted site of a possible Russian attack. Gaurav, Putin has declared war. It's all bets are off now. The time for diplomacy appears to have ended. That window has closed. He's talked about military action. He's talked about a special operation in the Donbass region as well. What are you hearing, Gaurav?
Shiv, you can hear emergency vehicles in the background. You can hear explosions. Explosions were heard in Mariupol, which is the railhead and the biggest town in this region, barely about 20-odd kilometers from the front lines, where Russian troops were poised to enter till late last night. And late last night, the information was that anything could happen, and that is why emergency was imposed in this area. But even now, through the light drizzle, you can hear explosions in this area. With the police now on the streets, the army, of course, at the borders, but information that is filtering in, as you very rightly pointed out, Shiv, the time for diplomacy is over. Military operations appear to be happening, and the Russian President Vladimir Putin has directly reached out to the Ukrainian army, saying do not engage the Russian forces. So this special military operations to take control of this entire region, of this entire Donbass region, appears to be going on as per plan, which of course Russia describes not as war, not as aggression, but a special military operation to demilitarize the Ukrainian army.
And what's the, in terms, all the military movements that you're seeing on the ground, Gaurav, is it much more than what it was over the last few days? So it looks like defensive measures are being moved into place.
Shiv, defensive measures already in place. Remember, in our report yesterday, when we were right at the front line, barely 3 kilometers from where the Russian soldiers were on the Ukrainian side, and we were the only channel to be given that access here in eastern Ukraine. You saw Ukrainian soldiers in their trenches. You saw their armored personal carriers and their weapons, including some of the weapons that they told us not to show, the newer weapons that have come in from the West. All of those weapons appear to have been deployed now and civilian localities cleared. We sent you that report about how village after village after village, with thousands of people now evacuated, just a handful remain to look after their homes. But the indication from the Russian side, even to the civilians, was vacate this entire area. Perhaps the intelligence inputs seem to indicate that they were poised for a military operation that now appears to be underway in the border areas. But will it remain only restricted to that border belt or come all the way to that entire Donbass region, including the railhead, Mariupol, where explosions were heard just a short while back, and then extend, as information seems to be coming in about action in Kyiv, in Kharkiv and other parts of Ukraine? That remains to be seen, Shiv.
Very, very, the situation is rapidly deteriorating. It looks like it, because since the time we spoke to Gaurav an hour ago, the number of sounds we're hearing on the ground are much more. Gaurav, you're in the eastern part of Ukraine. We've got a map up, where we'll put that map up on our screens so our viewers can tell exactly where Gaurav is reporting from right now, with those shells exploding in the background. Gaurav, how is this going to work? Are there enough military forces in the place where that you are right now, or will there be a movement of forces, from the western part of Ukraine, from the mainland, so to speak, into where you are?
Shiv, majority of the Ukrainian forces have been fighting in this Donbass region since 2014. So their involvement and their engagement here is very intense, and which is where several military analysts here and overseas have been saying that this Donbass region is saturated, given that 30% of that area was with rebels, now an independent People's Republic, 70% with Ukraine. So Ukraine, to retain control of that 70%, has massive deployment. But remember, that massive deployment is to take on separatist forces, maybe backed by Russia, but not directly Russia, in terms of having the kind of military hardware, professionalism, training, tactics adopted by the Russian army directly for a full-scale military operation. So that is where now it remains to be seen that those forces who've been fighting in this region 2014 onwards, are they in a position to withstand? Yes, they can withstand separatists backed by Russia. Can they withstand a direct assault of the Russian forces, which does appear to be either imminent or underway at the front lines? That's point one. And point two, especially without the backing of any other nature, other borders are also equally, if not more, vulnerable, Shiv, whether it's Crimea in the south or from Belarus in the north, the Sea of Azov. Yesterday we were reporting from the Sea of Azov, and Sea of Azov has a lot of sea mines that have now been put across that entire water belt to prevent an amphibious assault. So Ukraine is taking a number of measures to protect its territory, but will those measures stand up to a professional army like the Russian army directly moving in? Remains to be seen and should be clear in the next 24 to 48 hours, Shiv.
What does the Ukrainian military look like, Gaurav? The Russians have put out huge numbers of information warfare videos of their tanks, their armored vehicles, their guns, their artillery, their aircraft. We haven't seen much of the Ukrainian military itself. What does that look like? How strong are they militarily? Of course, a lot of hardware has been pouring in over the last few days. We've got some graphics comparing the militaries of Russia and Ukraine. Of course, there's no real comparison when you do a kind of bean count of the two militaries. But what does the Ukrainian military look like? Can it defend itself in the absence of outside intervention?
The moment Russia said it's moving in for action, and all talks had failed initially after the Russian President Vladimir Putin's address to the nation, what did President Vladimir Zelensky do on ground? He sought international support, and that is an indication of ground realities here. As you very rightly pointed out, Shiv, there is, if you look at the military balance, it's tipped heavily in Russia's favor, and no two ways about it. While and that's the comparison, Shiv. Since you talk hardware very extensively, T-80 UD tanks Ukraine, T-90 tanks Russia. They've got now, of course, now they've got their Javelin missiles that are coming in. America sent in a lot of ATGMs or anti-tank guided missiles to Ukraine, but it takes time to operate those systems, and whether all of this will come into use when there is a huge Russian blitzkrieg, if I may, in this area, if should that happen, whether there's a missile attack, whether there are airborne forces that are used against Ukraine. Also do keep in mind, Shiv, that the population here, and especially in the east, does have a lot of sympathy for the Russians. So that is another issue that Ukraine would have to deal with. There are people who are saying, like President Putin, that Ukraine should not become a playground of NATO countries. So in all of that, can Ukraine actually stand up to an organized Russian army assault, even if it's restricted to an area? It does appear rather unlikely, but then it's always the man behind the gun and his motivation, his dedication, and the higher level of leadership that would take that call ultimately, because everyone was still hoping, or till late last night when we were speaking to people on ground, they were hoping diplomatically a solution would be found. But the resistance that was shown in terms of what the Ukrainian government was saying, emergency being imposed, conscription, asking reservists to come out, was all an indication that the balloon very soon is going up.
No, Joe Biden has spoken. It was a brief message on the back of this declaration of war by Russia on Ukraine. Using pretty much the same language, that any military intervention will have very, very high costs. But he's not talked about those costs, Gaurav. Those costs have not been identified by the West. And that's the reason why things are still being held in so much suspense. What kind of military pushback is the West, whether it is NATO, whether it is the United States, whether it is the NATO nations in Europe, willing to actually put into Ukraine in the event of this declaration of war? Well, Putin has gone ahead and declared war now. Is there any sense, I know I'm asking this again and again, Gaurav, but is there any sense of what the West and NATO will bring to the table militarily, once the boots hit the ground, as they already have?
Shiv, this may be a little premature, but perhaps Ukraine has been hung out to dry by the West. Yes, they've given military hardware, $500 million worth in recent months, and $2.5 billion worth ever since operations started in Donbass region. So those $2.5 billion worth of weapons are here, systems are here, intelligence gathering is here. If you look at Ukraine's skies, even as you and I speak at this point of time, with a NOTAM issued, that notice to airmen that prevents any civilian air traffic movement, there are only military planes in the sky, and those are intelligence gathering planes in the sky. There are no civilian aircraft in the sky. Now, this is an indication, Shiv, that the West may give intelligence and is providing intelligence. They will give military hardware, but nothing beyond. And President Putin's made that, President Joe Biden has made that very clear, that there will be no American boots on ground in Ukraine, and especially after what's happened to the American forces in Afghanistan and in Iraq. Those were not organized armies. Those were militias, of course, in Afghanistan, backed by Pakistan. And Pakistan's Prime Minister, incidentally, is in Moscow right now, hoping to have a meeting with President Putin. But that aside, here is one of the strongest armed forces in the world, the Russian armed forces, with their 6,500 nuclear weapons, warheads, with such a strong airborne forces, with nuclear submarines, with their tanks and their missiles, intercontinental ballistic missiles. Shiv, you and I reported on the tests, on the strategic forces exercise that was just carried out. So Russia sent out a very strong message. Russia's also made it very clear that these sanctions, and sanctions notwithstanding, perhaps the only sanctions that would really hurt the Russians is Nord Stream 2 to Germany. But then that equally hurts Europe, it hurts Germany. So it remains to be seen how long those sanctions remain in place. But as of now, Russia has decided that this imminent military operation is underway in the Donbass region, Shiv.
We've got some breaking news coming in, Gaurav. I'm just taking you through this. Stay with me. The Ukrainian finance minister has just tweeted, and I want to read out this tweet because this is a big one. This is the first official reaction coming in from the Ukrainian government. The Ukraine finance minister has just tweeted to say that Putin has launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Peaceful Ukrainian cities are under strikes. This is a war of aggression. Ukraine will defend itself and will win. The world can and must stop Putin. The time to act is now. Gaurav, that first reaction coming in from the Ukrainian government, and it minces no words at all over what's going on. They're saying that peaceful cities are under strikes as well, and we've seen some of these pictures from Kyiv also, Gaurav, of some explosions taking place. Any sense you can make of this? What is the Ukrainian FM talking about? He says Ukrainian cities are under strikes as well.
Shiv, as of now, even as we speak, the information that is filtering in indicates a full-fledged Russian offensive. Of course, Russia is saying that this military offensive is restricted to the Donbass region, but both the Americans and Ukrainians are saying that even Kyiv is under attack, and that is why there are no civilian flights in this area. And Kyiv, as you well know, Shiv, is barely 90 miles from the Belarus border, where you have about 30,000 Russian soldiers who've carried out long military drills with their military hardware poised to strike. So yes, this is a country that one was facing imminent threat, but now perhaps is facing this imminent attack. In Mariupol, where we are at this point of time, you could hear explosions a short while back in the background. In the border areas, reports through the night seem to indicate that there was very massive movement taking place on the other side. We're still waiting for updates through local contacts and of course through the government here. But this attack, Shiv, was imminent even last night when we were reporting the deployment of the Russian forces on the other side, poised for a strike into Ukraine.
Okay, and Gaurav, one final question before I let you, let you off air so you can report for us from the ground as well. I want to ask you about air power, Gaurav. What is the air power situation right now? You talked about the NOTAM right now. Airspace is highly controlled at this point of time. Russia is a supremely, greater air power in terms of what it can bring to the fight in the absence of a NATO intervention. What are you hearing on the air power front?
Again, as you well know, Shiv, air power heavily tipped in Russia's favor. What we're also hearing, in fact, since yesterday, was a systematic attack on systems here, whether it is the banking system, communication system, disrupting all systems here so that even air power cannot be exploited or harnessed in Ukraine's case. So there is a very systematic assault that is on. Should Ukrainian aircraft get airborne, and given the way Russian radars are all across the place, the Russian missiles and surface-to-air missiles and S-400 systems that are deployed here all along. Those are S-400s that India considers in a way as very strong Brahmastra to protect our borders and our skies. Now, with Russia having all of that deployed, what can Ukraine's air power do in front of perhaps the biggest military power, one of the biggest military powers in the world, remains to be seen. And that is why indication from Ukraine's president constantly was seeking world support to deter, seeking enforcement of harsher sanctions, because it's clear as day. Now there's dawn breaking out here behind me in the Donbass region in Ukraine. It's clear as day. Can Ukraine militarily stand up to Russia? Perhaps not.
Gaurav, thanks very much for being with me. Stay safe, my friend. I'll keep coming back to you on this. Akshita, our reporting on the ground suggests that this military attack has already begun. We're going to have, a story on the weapon systems, on our screens in just a moment from now. We've got all of those graphics painting a picture on what the militaries between the two countries actually look like. But the sounds, the atmosphere where Gaurav is reporting from pretty much confirms, and that's the advantage of being the only Indian channel on the ground, because we can actually do it firsthand instead of others who are depending on their agencies, that the military operation appears to have already begun.
And we're putting it on our screens exactly where Gaurav is. Eastern Ukraine, this is the conflict zone between Ukraine and Russia currently. We're getting in also multiple reports, Shiv, of explosions being heard in different parts of Ukraine. As we speak, I can tell you, and this is the information we're picking up, that the Kyiv airport, the capital, it's being evacuated right now. Passengers and staff who were at the airport desperately trying to get out of Ukraine are being evacuated right now, considering the announcement that was made by Russia. We understand that there are a number of aircraft, foreign carriers also currently grounded at the Kyiv airport. They are unable to take off because the airspace has also been shut down. So that's the latest update that's coming in, even as there are multiple reports of explosions being heard in different parts of Ukraine. The latest is in Odessa of Ukraine. We're shortly going to also be putting out satellite images to show you exactly what the current troop buildup of Russia looks like. Gaurav, of course, will be getting us those updates also from the heart of the conflict zone, from Donbas. I just want to briefly again focus, Shiv, on the reaction that's come in from Ukraine. The first reaction has in fact confirmed that Putin, according to Ukraine, has launched a full-scale invasion. That last line that's been mentioned, Shiv, the world can and must stop Putin, to me sounds like an appeal from Ukraine to the West to intervene immediately.
It's a cry for help, that's reached a fever pitch now. Evacuations from cities, the Ukrainian finance minister talking about peaceful Ukrainian cities being under attack at this point of time is a terrifying prospect, Akshita, because, one had imagined that this would be, a border conflict of some kind restricted to the east. But Kyiv is not in the east. Kyiv is in the northern part of Ukraine. It's the capital city of Ukraine. We've got pictures on our screen of loud explosions that have been heard in Kyiv and other places. Is the Ukrainian finance minister really speaking facts when he says that peaceful Ukrainian cities are under attack? He's also said that the world can and must step in to stop Putin at this point of time. Putin, on the other hand, has said if the world steps in, there will be historic and devastating consequences. So you've got monsters on both sides right now, and it doesn't appear very clear what's going to happen militarily. The attack has begun. The information that we have on the ground suggests that the firing has already begun. There appears to be artillery shelling, which has been going on for a few days. The tempo of that artillery shelling appears to have increased on the ground as well. Gaurav has confirmed that there is a heightened, movement of military vehicles in that region. It's very easy to tell. Whenever there's a code red situation, you can always tell in a conflict zone by the number of vehicles that move. And Gaurav has confirmed to us firsthand that there are lots more vehicles actually moving right now. So time is running out now. Once the threshold is crossed, Akshita, once the actual shooting, war actually begins, and it appears to have already done so, the window for intervention becomes very, very small. Once the Russian forces move in, take hold of positions, demilitarize certain areas like they say they're intending to do, the window for post facto action becomes very small. It's always easier to preempt action, create defenses, dissuade a country from actually mounting military action. But once that military action actually begins, it becomes very difficult to sort of join the fight and then dissuade that country, because then you've given them the advantage. They've in some ways sort of read your bluff. Putin has always had this sense of, wondering whether NATO will intervene, whether the United States will intervene. And the fact that he has, pushed in his military and declared war in this way, can be read as him sort of reading the West's bluff and calling out the West's bluff and saying, you guys talk the big talk, but I don't think you have the stomach for actually putting your troops back in on this, especially after your experience in Afghanistan recently. And that's what's going on here. It's a terrifying global stage card game that's being played.
That's so true. And, Putin always has been a no-nonsense man. And that's where there be a lot of questions about what's led to this moment that we're talking about, where Putin has gone out and essentially declared war. Is only Russia to blame? Or did the West also play its cards wrong? We're going to continue tracking the story very closely here on India Today. Trust us to get you the latest updates from the ground with journalists who've covered these kind of conflicts time and again. Gaurav Sawant, Shivarur will stay with us on the other side of a very short break. We'll be right back with all the updates you need to know of what's happening in Ukraine.